I called my wife while she was at her lover's house. On the other end of the line, there was a freezing silence, a void filled with tension and barely contained despair. Seconds later, her voice sounded shaky, wavering, but trying desperately to remain calm. Love. I'm at work. Things took a little longer than expected. You know how it is. My heart hammered inside my chest, not out of suspicion, not out of mistrust, but out of the overwhelming certainty that consumed me inside. I knew exactly where she was. The GPS on her cell phone didn't lie. I was there, standing at the door of the house where she swore she had never been. I saw the shadows outside the window, heard hurried footsteps, nervous movements, panic on the other side of the door. The air felt heavy, charged with betrayal, dishonor, and the kind of pain no man should feel. I knew. I knew everything. And the worst of all was that, at that moment, she was still trying to deceive me. My hand was gripping the cell phone so hard that my fingers were shaking. With every word that came out of her mouth, the lie became more blatant. I love you, baby. I'm done here and I'm going home now. The bitter taste of betrayal burned my throat. I could hear something in the background, a muffled noise, a suppressed sigh, footsteps moving away from the phone. He was there. With her. At that exact moment. My blood boiled, my veins pulsed with an anger I had never felt before. I could have screamed. I could have pounded on the door and demanded that he come out, that he face me, that he tell me in my eyes what he was doing. But I didn't. Not yet. Because, at that moment, something even darker and more terrifying took hold of me. If she lied so easily, how many times had this happened before? How long have I been living an illusion? The silence of the night was broken when the door handle slowly moved. A figure appeared in the hallway of the house. First a hesitant shadow, then a face that twisted in shock and guilt. She froze when she saw me there, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open, her breathing quickened as if she were about to pass out. I felt a bitter pleasure seeing her like that, bewildered, with no way out. The lover? Ah, he was still hiding. Coward. Maybe I hoped the storm would pass, that she would somehow calm me down, that her cheap theater would still work. She tried to mumble something, but the words failed her. The weight of the truth crushed his chest. Love. But I didn't want to hear it anymore. What could she say that would change what I already knew? My mind was spinning in circles, reliving moments from the past that now felt like fragments of a broken dream. Every, I love you, every, you are the man of my life, every vow of fidelity and affection, all of this now sounded empty, a blatant lie uttered by lips that, minutes before, were on another man's. What was I to her? Just a fool. An idiot who believed in the promises of a marriage that, to me, was sacred, but to her, just a convenient social contract. My eyes moved away from her for a moment, darted around the corners of the house. Small details that would once have seemed insignificant now screamed the truth loud and clear. A bottle of wine, 2 glasses. Candles lit. A scent in the air that wasn't hers. A perfect setting for a night of pleasure and betrayal. As I drove here, I thought about how to confront her, how to say the right words to make her understand the pain she was inflicting on me. But now, looking at her, lost, desperate, deep fear in her eyes, I realized something even worse. She wasn't sorry. She was just scared about being caught. The phone was still in my hand, the call still open. I pressed the button and ended the call, looking at her intently. So that's it. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. A mix of disappointment and anger overflowed me, but I didn't want to scream. I wanted to see how far she would go with the lie. She swallowed, her hands shaking, but her mouth open to state the obvious. I can explain. No. She couldn't. Nothing would explain this. And then, a noise coming from inside. Steps. The cornered mouse realized there was no way out. The lover. The man who slept with my wife, hiding like a thief, like a worm. He hesitated before appearing, but I could already feel him there. The fear on her face gave everything away. And then, he finally emerged. High. Trusting. But at that moment, he looked like a scared boy. I stared at him. The silence between the three of us was an unbearable tension, almost suffocating. She looked from one to the other, as if trying to guess what I would do, as if looking for some impossible way out of the situation. I think we should talk like adults, he said, trying to sound rational. My gaze fell on him, measuring every detail, every nuance. The tone of his voice, the way he stood, he already felt superior. He already thought he had won, that I was just the poor betrayed husband who would have to accept defeat. But what they didn't know, is that I already knew much more than they imagined. She didn't just cheat on me out of lust or boredom. No. This went far beyond simple infidelity. There was a plan. A dirty plan, drawn up over time, calmly, coldly. A plan to destroy me. To rip away everything I built. To reduce me to nothing. And at that moment, while she was trying to come up with yet another lie to deceive me, while he was pretending to be a civilized man, I already knew the truth. I knew every detail. And more than anything, I knew this night wouldn't end the way they expected. Their game was over. But mine was just beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support cheating in any way. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they carry an undeniable truth. Betrayal destroys lives, tears hearts and leaves marks that can never be erased. Each narrative is a brutal reminder of how infidelity can turn love into hate, trust into ruin, and happiness into tragedy. Get ready. The story you are about to hear is shocking, intense and full of twists and turns that will keep you hooked until the last second. Now, take a deep breath and dive into this plot of betrayal and revenge. Good story. Night fell gently over the city, bringing with it a warm wind that swayed the white curtains of the large living room where Daniel used to spend his evenings after a long day of work. The woody aroma of the perfume he always wore still hung in the air, mixing with the light smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. His home was a perfect reflection of what he and Laura they had built over the years, cozy, balanced, without excess, but with subtle touches of affection and personality in every corner. Photographs of the two of them on trips were scattered across the shelves, reminders of times when love seemed eternal and unbreakable. In the center of the dining table, a vase of white lilies, her favorite flowers, which he insisted on buying every week, a small gesture that always brought a smile from his wife. Daniel was 38 years old, a centered man, with a strong presence, someone who commanded respect without having to demand it. I worked in the financial sector, a competitive and exhausting environment, but I always found time for Laura. Since the beginning of their relationship, he believed that small attitudes were the key to keeping a marriage alive, like the notes he left on the bathroom mirror, the unexpected messages during the day, the impromptu breakfasts on Sundays. He knew that time wears on any relationship, but he refused to be swallowed up by routine. His love for Laura was something he carried with pride, a solid feeling, cultivated with patience and care. However, lately, something seemed to be different. He didn't know exactly what, but he felt it. A kind of growing void between them, a silent separation, as if something invisible was interposing itself between the two. She was different. More distant, more distracted. When he looked at her, he had the impression that his mind was somewhere else, wandering to thoughts he couldn't reach. Laura, on the other hand, was a charming woman. At 35 years old, she maintained the same beauty that made Daniel fall in love with her in the past. His expressive eyes carried a mysterious depth, and his smile, when sincere, was capable of lighting up any room. At the beginning of their marriage, she was engaging, passionate and spontaneous. I liked surprising him, planning unexpected trips, preparing special dinners for no apparent reason. But over the years, that flame seemed to have slowly faded. Long conversations before bed were replaced by silence. Casual touch while cooking together became rare. Laura was still a devoted wife, but there was something about her that escaped, as if part of herself was missing, lost in a place Daniel didn't know. He tried not to pay much attention to this change, convincing himself that maybe it was just a phase, the weight of responsibilities, the tiredness of everyday life. But the truth is that it bothered him. It scared him. It made him wonder if, at some point, without realizing it, he had lost his wife to something or someone. Their routine was peaceful, without major conflicts. They were a respected couple, those that friends admired and said were an example of relationships. Together for more than a decade, they had a structured life, a well-kept home, and a stable social circle. But something always seemed missing for Laura. She was never the type to be content with stability, she was always looking for excitement, newness, those butterflies in her stomach that she used to feel in the first years of her marriage. I missed the intensity, the unpredictability, the feeling of being alive in a way that routine didn't provide. And lately, these feelings have become even more evident to her. Daniel, despite being an exemplary husband, didn't realize how much she longed for something more. He thought that small gestures were enough, that words of affection were enough, that the security of marriage was all she needed. But Laura wanted more. She wanted to feel her heart race, she wanted to look in the mirror and see a different version of herself, she wanted to experience something she couldn't predict. That particular night, while Daniel finished reviewing some reports in his home office, Laura was sitting on the couch, holding her cell phone between her fingers, her gaze lost. She was wearing a simple dress, made of light fabric, but her feet were restless, crossing and uncrossing her legs, as if something inside her was at war. Her mind wandered to thoughts that she tried to push away, but which always came back, uncontrollable. When he entered the room, she quickly locked her cell phone screen and smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel didn't notice, or pretended not to notice. He sat down next to her, put his arm around her shoulders, but felt her body rigid, distant. I didn't say anything. He just stayed there, waiting for her to snuggle like she usually did, waiting for that bad feeling to go away. But it didn't disappear. The days went on like this. Moments when they seemed to be together, but were so far away. Moments when they looked at each other, but it was as if they didn't really see each other. Until, one day, Daniel started to notice small details that had previously escaped him. Laura went out more than usual, citing last-minute commitments. I would arrive home later, distracted, sometimes nervous. The phone was always facing down, something she had never done before. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, but his instinct screamed otherwise. He began to observe more closely, to pay attention to every little change. And without realizing it, he was creating a wall between them, an abyss where there was once a safe path. Little by little, Daniel's eyes became more attentive, his night's sleep more restless. He tried to remember when exactly everything started to change, when Laura stopped being that vibrant woman by his side and started being someone he barely recognized. Maybe the answer was right in front of him this whole time. Maybe he just didn't want to see. But one thing was certain, something was wrong. Very wrong. And he wouldn't rest until he found out what it was. The days continued to pass, but Daniel's restlessness grew inside him like a slow, corrosive poison. He tried to convince himself that everything was just a figment of his imagination, that Laura was still the same woman he loved, that maybe she was just tired, distracted, overwhelmed. But reality always imposed itself brutally. Little details that had previously seemed insignificant now screamed before his eyes like irrefutable evidence that something was wrong. She went out more often, claiming commitments that didn't exist before. The smiles seemed less sincere, the touches more absent, the eyes always avoiding his in moments of intimacy. The phone was never within her reach when they were together, and when it vibrated on the table, she reached for it too quickly, deleting messages without even giving him time to try and look at it. Worst of all was the emptiness, the feeling of sleeping next to a woman who, somewhere along the way, had become a stranger. He remembered every detail of her. I knew by heart the way she used to hold her cup of coffee in the morning, the way she tilted her head when she was distracted, the sparkle in her eyes when she laughed at something silly. But now, everything seemed mechanical, as if Laura was acting out a role to maintain the appearance of normalcy. And Daniel? He refused to be just a spectator of something that no longer seemed to belong to him. So, he started to observe more. If before he tried to avoid the signs, now he looked for them. And he found them. The messages she sent and deleted so quickly. I answered the calls in a low voice, leaving the room so he wouldn't hear. The unjustified delays, the longer showers, the mysterious smiles that appeared when she looked at her cell phone. The truth was there, naked and raw, ready to be faced. But Daniel still hesitated. He wanted to believe he was wrong. I wish it was just paranoia. Then one night, while she was sleeping, he made a decision. He took her cell phone and, with his heart pounding in his chest, tried to unlock it. He didn't make it. The password had been changed. The chill ran down his spine like a warning. She had never changed her password before. He never had any reason to hide anything from him. But now it was. Now, there was something there that she didn't want him to see. And he knew exactly what it was. The pain settled in his chest like a blade, cutting deep, destroying any hope that there could still be a plausible explanation for all of this. He didn't say anything. He lay down next to her again, listening to her calm breathing, while her mind swirled with despair. That was it. It was real. Laura was hiding something. And he needed to find out. The next morning, the decision had already been made. He wouldn't ask anything. I wouldn't confront with empty words, waiting for rehearsed answers. He needed proof. Something that made the truth undeniable, something that left no room for excuses or well-constructed lies. Then, discreetly, he activated a tracking app on her cell phone. I knew it was invasive, that perhaps I was crossing a limit from which there would be no return. But the betrayal, if it existed, had already crossed all limits before he even thought about acting. He needed to know. He needed to see it with his own eyes. The days that followed were torment. The tracking showed that she went out to places she never mentioned being. There was a pattern, a repeated destiny. An unknown address, in a neighborhood she never had reason to frequent. Daniel felt his blood boil every time he saw the red dot marking the spot. Who lived there? Who was the person who welcomed his wife while he worked, while he believed she was in meetings, on trivial commitments? The answer seemed obvious, but he needed to confirm it. So, on a night like any other, while Laura was leaving with yet another lame excuse, he decided to follow his car. The journey was short, but every minute seemed like an eternity. Streetlights flickered in rapid flashes through the car's glass, and the silence inside the cabin was deafening. He parked at a safe distance and watched. His heart was beating against his ribcage with brutal force, cold sweat running down the back of his neck. And then, there she was. Getting out of the car with extreme caution, looking around as if afraid of being seen. But what hurt the most was the way she walked to the door of the house. As if you were going to your true home. As if that was the place he really wanted to be. Minutes passed. Daniel could have entered. He could have made a fuss, knocked on the door and demanded explanations. But he didn't want to hear it. He wanted to see. I needed to see it. Then he waited. And when, after a time that seemed infinite, the light in one of the rooms came on and he saw the silhouettes projected against the thin curtain of the window, everything inside him broke. The woman he loved, the woman with whom he shared years of his life, was there, inside that house, in the arms of another man. Daniel felt a bitter taste rise in his throat, a mixture of hatred and overwhelming pain. It was true. It always was. He just refused to accept it. The movements were clear, undeniable. The approach, the touches, the kiss. There was no room for doubts or explanations. The betrayal was there, in front of him, raw. And it was at that moment, with the phone still in hand, that he made the final decision. He called Laura. I wanted to hear. I wanted to know how far she would have the courage to lie. The phone rang, and inside, he saw her abruptly walk away. His body stiffened, his hand shook as he picked up his cell phone. Answered. The voice came low, hesitant. Hi, love. I'm at work. The lie came easily, automatically. Daniel smiled, but there was no joy in the smile. He took a deep breath, looked back at the house, at the betrayal happening right before his eyes. The anger grew, the pain intensified, but something stronger emerged inside him. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about something much bigger. Something that was yet to come. And he was ready for whatever it was. The line between love and hate is thinner than you might think. Daniel's heart, which had previously pounded with the love he felt for Laura, now pulsed with the fury of someone who had been deceived, betrayed and humiliated in the cruelest way possible. He stood there, standing in front of the house where his wife was, watching her silhouette move next to that of another man. The weight of betrayal was crushing, but inside him was something even greater. Something that wasn't just about the infidelity itself, but the reason behind it. Something that was about to be revealed. The call was still open, and he could hear the panic in her voice. Baby, are you okay? What it was. The words were empty, full of fear and hesitation. Daniel felt his blood boil, his fists clenched at his sides. He took a deep breath, feeling a bitter taste in his mouth before saying with a biting coldness. Look at the door. The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. An instant of paralysis. And then, he saw it. The door opened slowly and, in the doorway, Laura appeared. His face was pale, his eyes wide in pure despair. Behind her, hurried footsteps. The lover. The man who got in the way of her marriage, who took for himself what didn't belong to him. Daniel didn't take his eyes off them. The other hesitated, as if considering running away, but knew it would be no use. Laura tried to formulate an excuse, mumbling meaningless words, her breathing shaky. Daniel, please let me explain, he laughed, but there was no humor in that laugh. Explain what? That you were here. What deceived me? Who lay in another man's bed while I was at home thinking you loved me? Venom dripped from each word, and he watched as tears began to form in her eyes. But there was no more room for compassion. It was then that the lover finally spoke. Listen, man, we need to talk like adults. I didn't want it to be like this, Daniel interrupted him, taking a step forward. Shut up. I don't want to hear your voice. You are nothing more than a rat who hides while destroying the lives of others. The other man instinctively backed away, but Laura intervened, desperately trying to contain the damage. It's not just about that, Daniel. There's something you need to know, her voice was choked, a growing desperation. But Daniel didn't want to hear it. What do I need to know, Laura? How much did you like lying to me? How much fun did you have knowing I trusted you? But then, something changed on her face. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was fear. A deep, real fear. And when she looked at her lover beside her, Daniel knew there was something more. Something much worse than he imagined. That was when the lover, no longer able to escape, let out a long sigh, running his hand through his hair with obvious nervousness. He'd better know at once, Laura. There's no point in hiding it anymore. Daniel felt his heart stop for a second. Every muscle in his body tensed. Know what? He demanded, voice thick with fury and disbelief. Laura looked away, pressing her arms against her body, as if she could protect herself from something invisible. Her hesitation only made everything even more unbearable. But it was the lover who spoke first. This was never just a betrayal. Laura and he hesitated for a moment, but then continued. We planned it. From the beginning. Daniel felt a shock go through his chest like a sharp blade. Planned. The word came out of his mouth like a whisper of pure horror. Laura was crying now, but she didn't deny it. He no longer tried to defend himself. The lover continued. She never just wanted to cheat on you. That was part of the plan. You trust people too much, Daniel. You always trusted her too much. He always thought love was enough. But love was never enough for Laura. Daniel's breathing became heavy, and he felt anger take over every fiber of his being. What are you talking about? Laura finally looked at him, her face washed with tears, her voice shaking. It was all about the money, Daniel. The revelation hit him like a punch in the stomach. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. The world spun. I've wanted out of this marriage for a long time. But I didn't want to leave with nothing. I wanted what was rightfully mine. Daniel couldn't process it. The betrayal alone was painful enough. But realizing that everything, absolutely everything, had been planned from the beginning, was unbearable. He felt out of breath. Were you with me for money? Her silence was answer enough. The lover crossed his arms, sighing. She knew you would never suspect. That you trusted her too much. All we needed was a reason to divorce. Something that would guarantee us an advantage. An affair, a betrayal, and then we would allege emotional abuse. We will say that you neglected her, that she suffered for years. With that, she would have half of what you have. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Every memory of the wedding played like a movie in her mind, but now everything seemed distorted, contaminated. He looked at Laura, searching for some humanity, some genuine guilt. But all he found was fear. Did you really think I would never find out? His voice was just a thread. Laura sobbed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't want you to find out like this. Daniel laughed again. This time, a bitter, lifeless laugh. But you wanted to destroy me. That was in your plans, wasn't it? She didn't respond. It didn't need to. The truth was there, exposed, cruel and with no chance of being undone. Daniel didn't know how to react. His heart was destroyed. His marriage, his trust, everything he believed to be real, was a lie. A well-constructed illusion. But he wouldn't just stand there. I wouldn't let them emerge victorious. There was something they didn't know. Something that would change everything. And when Daniel finally looked up at Laura, his expression was no longer one of pain. It was something different. Something that made the color drain from her face. Because now, he had a plan. The silence between them seemed to stretch on for an eternity, filling the space with a suffocating weight. Daniel's gaze, now cold and calculating, cut through Laura like a sharp blade, dismantling each layer of her charade. He no longer saw the woman he loved for years, the one who shared his life, his achievements, his pain. No. What stood before him now was a stranger, someone who had planned every detail, every lie, every betrayal. The worst of all was not the infidelity itself, but the wickedness of the intention behind it. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was a plan. A dirty, cold and calculated plan to destroy him, tear away everything he built and throw him into the mud without any remorse. Laura was trying to find words, but nothing seemed to make sense anymore. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. He knew that any excuse would sound pathetic given what had been revealed. The lover, on the other hand, crossed his arms, trying to maintain a confident posture, but Daniel saw a flicker of uncertainty deep in his eyes. Perhaps he realized, too late, that Daniel was not the type of man who would accept being thrown to the ground without fighting back. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a dry blow. And now? What was the next step, Laura? Turn me into a monster so the judge would feel sorry for you. Say I was abusive. What made you unhappy? Reducing me to a villain while you emerge as a victim. Laura pressed her arms against her body, her expression a mix of guilt and despair. It's not that simple, Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. No. Do you want me to believe that it was a meticulous plan, but somehow it wasn't your fault? She took a step back, as if the intensity of his gaze made her feel small. But it wasn't just the look. It was the energy around him. Something had changed. Something inside Daniel had broken once and for all, but at the same time, something stronger took its place. The lover stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. Look, man, you have to understand that sometimes things get out of control. Me and Laura, Daniel interrupted him with a sharp look. If you say one more word, I will make you regret every decision that has brought you to this moment. The lover swallowed, hesitating. Laura looked from one to the other, feeling control of the situation slipping from her hands. For the first time that night, she actually seemed to fear what might happen next. Daniel took a deep breath and passed his hand over his face, feeling the heat of the night mixed with the storm inside him. But he couldn't lose control now. He needed to be meticulous. Smart. Strategic. This was what they didn't expect. They thought he would react with blind fury, that he would break everything, that he would scream. They wanted him to be irrational because it would empower them in the narrative they were putting together. But he wouldn't give them that taste. Laura, he said, voice more controlled now, almost calm. The problem with coming up with such detailed plans is that you never expect the other person to be one step ahead. Her gaze wavered. What do you mean? Daniel smirked. A smile that made even her lover shift uncomfortably. Do you think I haven't noticed your changes? Do you think I didn't realize something was wrong months ago? Laura, I have always been an attentive man. I just needed to make sure what you were doing. Her eyes widened. Did you know? He took a step forward, narrowing his eyes. I suspected. But now, I have proof. And believe me, you'll hate knowing what I did to them. Laura seemed to panic. Daniel, no, you can't do anything to harm us like this. He tilted his head, studying her. Harm us? Is there a we now, Laura? The lover finally exploded. Listen, man, you're taking this too far. Let's resolve this without games. Daniel looked at him, evaluating every word. No games. Do you want to talk about games, after devising a plan to destroy my life? The lover took a step forward, but was stopped by Daniel's gaze, which now carried something dark. He didn't need to scream. His presence now spoke for itself. I recorded everything. Your every move. Every encounter. Every message. Every word said in your home. I know exactly how you plan to take me down. I know the names they mentioned. I know the lies they were preparing. And you know what else? I have already sent everything to my lawyers. The shock on their faces was almost satisfying. Laura staggered back a step, the air seeming to be running out of her. Daniel, no, you wouldn't do that, he approached, closing the distance between them, his voice now low, carrying an implacable firmness. I would. And I did. The lover ran his hands through his hair, desperate. That can't be true. He's bluffing. Laura looked at Daniel, searching for any hesitation on his face. But he didn't find it. I'm not bluffing, he continued. I never bluff when it comes to my life. And now, you too are going to pay for what you tried to do to me. She put her hands to her head, tears streaming down her face. This is going to kill me, Daniel, he leaned in slightly, whispering with a cruel tone. You should have thought of that before. The lover pulled Laura by the arm, murmuring something, trying to get her out of there, but Daniel was no longer paying attention. He had already won. They were broken, and their downfall was just beginning. As Laura sobbed and her lover desperately tried to find a way out of the chaos, Daniel turned and slowly walked back to his car. He didn't look back. It didn't need to. The past had come undone there, that night. He got into the car and started the engine, taking a deep breath before driving off. The weight of betrayal was still there, but there was no more pain. Just an emptiness. But perhaps, in the midst of it all, he would find something new. Something that wasn't a lie. And as he drove down the road, far from the scene of his destruction, something inside him told him this story was just beginning. The road in front of him stretched out in an endless line of dark asphalt, lit only by the headlights of his car. The city was behind, as was everything he believed to be his life until a few hours ago. Daniel's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but his mind seemed fragmented, thoughts flashing through his mind in disjointed flashes. He took a deep breath, trying to absorb the gravity of what had happened. The betrayal in itself was already an open wound, but the revelation of Laura and her lover's cold and meticulous plan had turned that wound into something even deeper. The pain now wasn't just from heartbreak, but from an entire life built on lies. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still running through his veins. The panicked expression on Laura's face, the shock on her lover's face, the fear written in each of their choked words. He had expected to feel greater relief at seeing them in ruin, but all that was left now was a strange emptiness, a deafening silence within him. Her words echoed in his mind, not because of guilt, but because of the realization that everything was planned in a cruel way. Her love never existed in the way he imagined. It wasn't the story he'd been telling himself for years. She was never the woman he thought he knew. And that was worse than anything else. He drove aimlessly for a while, the radio off, the car's engine the only sound accompanying his solitude. The night around him seemed to watch him, as if the entire universe witnessed his fall and awaited what would come next. At some point, without even realizing how he got there, he stopped the car in an empty parking lot of a roadside hotel. Sitting in the driver's seat, he stared at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from exhaustion, from a silent anger, from an emotional exhaustion that seemed to weigh more than anything he had ever felt before. He needed to think. I needed to decide what to do next. I couldn't just keep driving nowhere. His home was no longer his home. The marriage no longer existed. The trust you once had in someone was shattered. But what now? How to rebuild something from scratch when all its references had been destroyed? He took out his cell phone, staring at the screen for a few seconds. There were dozens of messages from Laura, missed calls, some even from unknown numbers. He ignored them all. He knew that the excuses, the supposed explanations, the desperate attempts to convince him not to continue with his tests, all of that had already begun. She would try anything to avoid the consequences. But it was too late. Slowly, he got out of the car and walked to the hotel reception. The attendant looked at him with a mixture of indifference and professional courtesy. He seemed used to seeing men like Daniel there, men with tired eyes, carrying more weight on their shoulders than any baggage. He took the room key without saying anything more than necessary. He went upstairs, entered the small room and locked the door behind him. He sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long sigh. Every muscle in his body felt tense, as if he were holding something about to explode. But he didn't allow himself to give in. Not now. Not yet. He picked up his cell phone again and opened the messages. Laura's words were predictable. First came the shock. Daniel, please, we need to talk. You can't do this to me. Then, emotional manipulation. I know I made a mistake, but you can't just throw away everything we had. Think about everything we built together. And finally, anger. If you go through with this, you will regret it. I'm not the only one who has secrets, Daniel. He laughed to himself, a bitter, empty laugh. Her despair was almost pathetic. He knew she was trying to find a way to turn the tables, to turn him into the villain of the story. But she had underestimated something essential: he was no longer the man she trusted blindly. He was no longer the man who would accept being manipulated. He slid his fingers over the screen, looking for another contact. Your lawyer. The only person who needed to hear your voice right now. The call was answered on the second ring. Daniel, are you okay? The voice on the other end was firm, but carried a restrained concern. He let out a sigh, feeling the weight of each word before speaking. I am. But we need to move forward with the plan. I want this to end as quickly as possible. The lawyer was silent for a moment, as if he was choosing his words carefully. Are you sure? Once this is done, there is no going back. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, allowing himself to feel the last wave of pain before burying it once and for all. I've never been so sure of anything in my life. He knew what he needed to do. There was no more room for doubts, for hesitations. Laura and her lover would pay for every lie, every manipulation, every meticulous plan made at their expense. They wanted to destroy it, but their plan had backfired. They thought he wouldn't react, that he would just be a betrayed man, sunk in pain. But now, he was in control. And there was nothing more dangerous than a man who had already lost everything. The night wore on, but Daniel didn't feel sleepy. Sitting on the hotel bed, he looked at the cell phone still in his hands. I knew Laura would try everything. She would cry, she would beg, she would try to convince him that she was sorry, that everything could be different. But he also knew that deep down that wasn't true. Her regret did not come from guilt for what she did. It just came from the fear of losing. Losing stability, losing security, losing the plan she had built for so long. The phone vibrated once again. Another message from her. He didn't read it. It just turned off. It no longer mattered what she had to say. The only sound that mattered now was the echo of his own decisions. He had been betrayed, deceived, manipulated, but he would not be defeated. And, above all, he would no longer be the same man as before. The version of him who trusted blindly, who believed in unconditional love, who thought good would always prevail, that Daniel was dead. In his place, there was only someone left who had learned in the most brutal way possible that the world wasn't about feelings. It was about control. And now, finally, control was back in his hands. The sound of the city at dawn seemed distant, drowned out by the incessant buzzing in Daniel's head. The night had been long, full of unbridled thoughts and emotions that he no longer knew how to name. But now, as he watched the sun begin to illuminate the road through the hotel window, he felt something different inside him. It was no longer pain, no longer pure anger. It was a cold resolve, an unrelenting clarity about what needed to be done. He knew that Laura would not give up easily. She would try to reverse the situation, she would find ways to put herself as a victim, she would play dirty. But he was already ready for this. He was no longer a man lost in the shock of betrayal. Now, he was someone who knew exactly how to move around the board. He picked up his cell phone and looked at the accumulated messages. Several calls from her, some from her lover, some from numbers he didn't recognize. Ignored them all. He called his lawyer directly, his voice serious and determined. I want everything to move forward as quickly as possible. I need to get out of this story with as little damage as possible. On the other end of the line, the lawyer sighed, recognizing the tone. We are already providing everything. But I want you to be aware that she may try to object, and you know how these processes can drag on if she decides to make it difficult. Daniel passed his hand over his face, feeling tired. Let her try. She has nothing against me. But I have everything against her. He hung up the call and got up, wearing the same clothes as the day before. My mind was spinning with my next steps. He needed to go home, collect what he needed, get everything organized so that Laura wouldn't have any advantage. He drove slowly, feeling the weight of each kilometer covered. When he parked in front of the house, he realized that her car was already there. His body stiffened, but he didn't hesitate. He got out of the car and crossed the entrance with firm steps, pushing the door without even knocking. Inside, Laura sat in the living room, her eyes sunken, her expression tired, as if the night had been equally cruel to her. But he was unmoved. No more. Her gaze met his, searching for some trace of compassion, of weakness. But all he found was coldness. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Daniel, please, we need to talk." He crossed his arms, without moving. "Speak." She hesitated, as if she didn't know where to start. So he tried what he did best, manipulate. "I know it all seems unforgivable right now, but you have to understand, it wasn't just about the money. I got lost in the middle of it, but I never wanted it to end like this. I never wanted to hurt you like this." He laughed humorlessly, shaking his head. "Do you want me to believe that, after months of plotting all this, you didn't want it to end like this? How exactly did you want it to end, Laura? With me ruined and you smiling as you took half of what I built? Tell me, what was the perfect ending for you?" She pursed her lips, visibly uncomfortable. "I regret it, Daniel. I know it seems absurd now, but I regret everything. I made wrong choices, I was influenced, I let myself be carried away," he interrupted, his voice thick with weariness and disdain. "You made choices, Laura. But they weren't wrong for you. They were wrong for me. You knew exactly what you were doing. You came up with a plan, you executed it, you betrayed me knowing I would never suspect. But now that everything has fallen apart, do you regret it? That's not regret, that's fear of the consequences." She lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. "I loved you, Daniel. I really loved you." He narrowed his eyes, feeling a wave of disgust wash over him. "You don't know what love is, Laura. If I had known, I wouldn't have done it." The silence between them was heavy, filled with everything that could no longer be reversed. Laura knew she had lost. He knew that any excuse he tried to make, any attempt to soften the truth, would be useless now. She was no longer the wife he loved. It was just someone he didn't recognize. He walked through the house, picking up a few things he would need in the next few days. The environment, which was once his home, now seemed like a dead landscape, a place where he no longer belonged. Laura followed him with her gaze, but didn't try to stop him. "I knew I no longer had the right." When he finally picked up the last suitcase, he stopped at the door and looked at it one last time. "That ends here, Laura. There's no turning back. You chose this. Now deal with the consequences." She sobbed, despair brimming in her eyes. But he didn't wait for an answer. He just left, closing the door behind him, leaving behind everything he once thought was real. When she got into the car and started it, she felt something inside her release. The pain was still there, the bitter taste of disappointment still burned his throat, but now there was something more. A new perspective. A fresh start. And deep down, he knew this story wasn't over yet. Time passed, but the open wound of that betrayal never completely healed. The truth had been cruel, tearing apart everything Daniel believed was real and leaving behind a trail of wreckage. However, unlike what Laura had planned, he was not consumed by grief. He didn't allow his life to be ruined by a woman who, for years, was by his side while he secretly engineered his downfall. No. He turned destruction into strength. And when everything came to a head, he was ready for the next step. The legal battle was exhausting, but he had the upper hand. The evidence was all on her side, and any attempt by Laura to reverse the narrative was crushed by the reality of the facts. She desperately tried to paint a picture of suffering, of an unhappy marriage where she was led astray by emotional neglect. But the records, the messages, the documented meetings, everything proved otherwise. There was no way to argue. She not only cheated, but tried to trick him into getting a lucrative divorce. But now, there was nothing left for her. No favorable agreement, no half of the equity, no advantage at all. She left the courtroom ruined, knowing that all her efforts had been in vain. Her lover had no better fate. With the exposure of the case and the calculating way in which everything had been handled, his professional reputation was destroyed. The scandal tarnished his name, removing any possibility of maintaining the stable career he valued so much. He was fired, had difficulty finding new opportunities and, like Laura, saw his life fall apart by his own hands. The relationship between the two, which previously seemed like a well-structured plot, did not survive the ruin. Without the money they had hoped to get from Daniel, without the manipulative power they had tried to exert, all they were left with was resentment. If before they had come together to destroy someone, now they hated each other for their mutual downfall. And so, shortly afterwards, the betrayal that had destroyed a marriage turned against them, and the relationship between Laura and her accomplice fell apart amid fights and accusations. Meanwhile, Daniel moved on. He had lost a lot, but he would not lose himself. The experience changed him, hardened certain aspects of his personality, but it didn't make him bitter. He refused to carry that pain as an eternal burden. Life needed to go on. And so he did. Over time, he met someone who, unlike Laura, did not hide ulterior motives. Little by little, he allowed himself to trust again, to love without the shadow of the ever-present past. But this time, without naivety. He would no longer be a man blind to the evidence, he would not ignore obvious signs, he would not bet everything on a person without first knowing who they really were. Betrayal taught a cruel but necessary lesson: trust is something that can be built, and should never be given away blindly. Laura, on the other hand, never fully recovered. The divorce exposed his true nature to everyone around him. Friends moved away, family members turned their backs, his life became a constant reminder of everything he had lost. He tried to start over, but always with the same destructive mentality, always trying to find ways to recover what he had lost. But he never made it. She was trapped in her own ruin, and this time, there was no one to blame but herself. And so the story came to an end. An end that Laura never predicted, a fate she tried to avoid, but which was inevitable given her choices. Daniel came out of this stronger, wiser, but he never forgot what he experienced. Betrayal may be the end for some, but for others, it is just the beginning of something much bigger. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you thought of this story. Have you ever experienced something similar? How would you react if you were in the protagonist's shoes? I want to know your opinion. And don't forget, this channel does not support any type of cheating. Here, stories are created to show the devastating consequences of a lie, and how infidelity destroys lives. If you like this narrative, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more impactful stories like this. Until next time.